I'm Parthivi Das, C2HR's Executive Director, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the latest installment of our HR Learning Series focused on hybrid work models. Please note that today's program will be recorded and available on demand viewing. We are able to offer free quality educational programs for our C2HR members thanks to the generous support of our 2023 sponsors. We appreciate each and every one of them. I'd like to invite you to attend the 2024 C2HR Con in Brooklyn on August 7th and 8th. It's an exciting opportunity to learn and network with HR colleagues across the content and connectivity industry. The day-long learning event will feature numerous sessions on hard-hitting HR topics and a keynote address by futurist Ravan Jesuthasan. I hope we will join us. We will be in person after many years, so we are looking forward to seeing all of you. For more details, visit www.c2hrcon.org. And now for today's program, we'll feature Michelle Fisk, the Sector Leader of Technology at Korn Ferry. Michelle will detail hybrid work's far-reaching impact on talent acquisition, diversity, retention, and engagement. She'll also share the innovative ways that companies are embracing flexible work models. Throughout the webinar, please post your questions and comments in the chat box, as Michelle will answer them after her presentation. Michelle, we can't thank you enough today for sharing your knowledge and your insight. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Parthivi, and I want to thank C2HR for letting me speak on this HR Learning Series, so thank you very much. I'm very excited to be talking about optimizing a flexible work model. It's probably one of the hottest topics that we deal with as talent acquisition and organizational strategy leaders, and it's probably turned into one of the most debated and sometimes even polarizing topics. So I am a sector leader at Korn Ferry, and I really specialize in executive and professional search for searches in really the TMT space, so technology, media, and telecommunications, and have been doing that search work for the last decade. I work across all functions, although I do specialize in HR functional searches. And of course, on all of our searches, we tend to work with a lot of the HR community. I have worked with a lot of the telecom and media clients, including Comcast, Cox, DirecTV, Discovery, and others. So I'm excited to talk to this group. Peyton, you can move to the next slide. So when most people think of Korn Ferry, they think executive search, but throughout the years, we really have expanded our services through acquisitions and organically through what we see are areas where we can exceed. We are now one of the largest organizational consultancy companies where half of our work that we do is on the advisory side. That's including leadership, professional development, total rewards, org strategy, assessments, and succession planning. And Peyton, you can move to the next slide. And really, our leaders are really focused on the advisory side on workforce transformation, DE&I, ESG and sustainability, revenue growth, and people cost optimization. We even provide and have an entire digital team for digital solutions for our clients. I think one of the most interesting areas that we have entered into in the last 2 decades was our Korn Ferry Institute. So in 2008, the Korn Ferry Institute was implemented as an innovation center focused on illuminating key trends and drivers of human and organizational performance. So they develop and infuse scientific research, cutting edge IP, and state-of-the-art analytics into Korn Ferry solutions, both through professional services and our digital solutions. What I appreciate about that is every time that I go in and talk to our clients about their needs, we have at our fingertips a significant amount of data, which helps us problem solve with our clients. For example, right before yesterday, right before this presentation, I received an email from the Korn Ferry Institute that had published their quarterly magazine, which is Korn Ferry Briefings. And on the front cover, it says, "Back to work for what?" And it had 3 very angry people on the front cover. And I was thinking, what timing? So I think again, they are always on top of the latest trends and what people are talking about. Peyton, you can move to the next slide. So the question really is what does the workforce look like? What does the workplace look like in the future and in 2023 and beyond? I think the one thing that everybody can agree upon is that people have fundamentally changed following the pandemic. Their behaviors, the way they work, the way they communicate, the way they manage, everything has changed about people in general. You can turn to the next slide. So the Korn Ferry Institute at the beginning of 2023 spoke to 4,000 professionals from 25 institutions across the US and UK to understand what are the organizational issues keeping them up at night. The workforce definitely looks unpredictable. The future of work looks unpredictable. And so leaders really can't afford to leave anything to chance. And it's time to lead with intention in 2023. You can switch to the next slide. It's really a time of transition. So a couple of statistics that they pulled as they were talking to people on what is keeping them up at night. And the number one statistic that I reviewed and I think is so telling is that 89% of professionals are suffering from burnout. That includes your top leaders in the C-suite, all the way down to your individual contributors, your people in call centers, your technicians in the workforce or in the field. Everyone is suffering from burnout. And 74% of professionals feel like employee turnover will only increase in the coming year. This is even with our current economy. And I think the one thing that people will think about, and these statistics were from the beginning of this year, but that's really when companies started to pull back from hiring, whether it was a right sizing or it was, concerns about the economy, about different future, revenues. There was a pullback. That did not mean that they still didn't have roles that they needed to fill, but they were implementing those hiring freezes. So a lot of the people that we talked to, 37% said upskilling and reskilling the current employees is one of the top ways of addressing that labor shortage. I just spoke to a head of talent leader for a technology company in the Bay Area. And because of hiring freezes, she said she was taking the opportunity to develop a junior leader on her talent team to be the next head of talent acquisition. She said, I would not have been able to do that back in 2021, 2022, but because of this hiring freeze, I have the ability to be able to train this person. So that is one of the things that people are doing. But 75% of organizations think the talent shortages are going to limit their organizational growth. So even though they are not hiring right now, they are also aware that is going to be a potential concern going into the future on their growth. 62% of organizations feel like they haven't faced a talent shortage like this before. And then I think still really interesting and still relevant, even though the market has seemed to turn this year, is that 31% of professionals are still thinking of leaving their job, even though they do not have something lined up. And that really goes to that first statistic, which is around burnout. So, and then Peyton, if you could move to the next slide. So really going to kind of the heart of what we want to talk about today is the different ways that people are working. So some statistics around remote working today. One of the things that I think is most glaring is that everything that you read seems to be sometimes in conflict with each other. And that's just because of the different way people are thinking of how to work going into as they continue to work. So less than 10% of employers are offering hyper-personalized digital employee experiences. And the reason why we have that statistics is because this is for remote working. And some people might question that and say, well, no, in 2020, we all made the shift to digital platforms, but that's not a hyper-personalized digital employee experience. Think of onboarding new employees during this time where everybody has been remote. They're getting is what they would have received in a conference room or a classroom, but it just happens to be a digital platform now. There's not a personalized way to give people the same kind of training that they would have received in an office setting. But then look at another statistic that 78% of professionals said they miss traveling for work. While we know that a lot of people are traveling personally now, the business travel has not really increased since the beginning of the pandemic. It has increased a bit, but not even close to where it was prior to 2019. And people are missing that part. They understand the value of those in-person meetings. 32% of professionals said they don't think they will ever go back into an office full-time. I completely believe that statistic because remember, that's a full-time saying, I'm never going to be in the office 5 days a week again. I would even argue that it may be higher than that. Where 49% of professionals said they would turn down a job offer if the company mandated that they would go into the office full-time. As an executive recruiter, I can tell you that is the absolute truth. I have probably worked on 3 searches in the last year where they were requiring, and these are technology companies, that they were requiring employees or the person that we're doing the search for to be in the office full time. And we share with our clients at the very beginning that we will find that person, but the search will take longer because most people will not agree to a role that they have to be in the office full time. It's because of the way that their behaviors have changed over the years. They're probably coming from another opportunity where they were not required to be in office. The benefits of remote work that everybody has seen over the last 3 years is you are all of a sudden have access to a huge number of talent that you did not have before. For example, a company that's headquartered in North Carolina that before they were requiring people to all be at headquarters are now being able to bring great talent from Chicago, from Boston, from the Bay Area that are able to stay where they are. And it's talent that they did not have before within their organizations. So that's really a huge benefit. And just in understanding, 75% of companies expect to operate more virtually. I think that is a given, that most companies have figured that out. And that is something that they were able to switch in 2020. Today, or back in 2019, Americans were fully remote. Americans that were fully remote was 6%. Today, it's at 27%. I thought it might even be higher, but 27% is definitely a big jump. So working from home kind of reveals a lot of different things. And I think the biggest debate that everybody talks about is productivity. Are people as productive at home as they are in an office? I think if these last 3 years have proven anything, it's that people can be productive really wherever they are. And even in 2020 and 2021, productivity actually increased. What's interesting is in 2022, productivity started falling a bit. And that was at the same time that companies were requiring employees to come back into the office. There would need to be some studies to understand kind of how that occurred. It could be that people aren't feeling good about being mandated to have to go back to the office. There's a lot of reasons, and there's a lot of factors in that we're going to discuss going forward. But a couple of things on this slide, and again, some things they all seem to be sometimes conflicting. 47% of people, mostly working in an office, resent accommodating their remote colleagues' flexibility demands. Think about managers where they have 15 direct reports and every one of them have a different viewpoint on what they want to be doing. So even when hybrid policies seem to be fair for all, they still are right. They're still causing problems. 52% of people working from home, they have the feeling of being disconnected from their colleagues. And that disconnect may be enough to make them leave their current job. I can tell you from personal experience that there are, different companies like Korn Ferry and others that have ended their leases of their physical locations. And that disconnect from that location has definitely had a huge bearing on a lot of people at our company. So I can only imagine those feelings at other companies. Then you have another stat that says 64% say going back to the office will have a negative impact on their health. I think we can all agree. I live in a, cul-de-sac in a residential area outside Philadelphia, and you see people walking up and down the street on phone calls, doing all sorts of things that they never had the opportunity to do before the pandemic. So people are being a lot more active now and feel like that they're having better experiences because of that ability to have that flexibility of working home. So another kind of statistic is that 50% of leaders, and these are your managers, your VPs, SVPs, C-suite, 50% of them want employees to come back full time. 11% of employees want to come back full time. And that is a small number, a small percentage, but it makes absolutely sense. The number that I find most interesting is that 62% want some time in an office. So a majority of employees today would like to have some kind of office setting, and probably because of that connectivity and cultural issues. So leaders are facing a balancing act as they are managing their teams. They're trying to give people the flexibility to work in ways that work for them with agreed upon workday boundaries for those working from home. But on the other hand, they're trying to build connected teams with a strong culture that everyone wants to be a part of. And that is quite a balancing act. Because the one thing, and as I said, that manager that's talking to his 15 direct reports, the one thing that everybody can agree upon is that few people are happy. Few people are happy with their current arrangement, whether it's they're working from home full time, they're in a hybrid situation, or they're in the office full time. So I think those are some interesting things for us to take a look at. And Peyton, you can take the slide down. So because we are talking in the technology market and the telecom market, a lot of my data, because that's where my experience lies, is around tech related and technology company roles. A lot has been in the news lately about a lot of the technology companies asking employees to come back to the office full time. You've heard of Amazon, you've heard of Google and Meta and Salesforce, and 70% of technology company roles, and employees are arguing this, are arguing they can be more productive at home. The corporate leaders at these companies are now disagreeing. One statistic that I read that kind of made me laugh is they said weekday golf outings shot up an astounding 272% since the pandemic. But if you ask all these leaders what, about their golf outings, they say, I'm working at night, I'm working on weekends, I'm still just as productive, but I have that flexibility to do those things. So I'm sure you've heard in recent news, like AT&T has been summoning back 60,000 managers to their office. In the Wall Street Journal this weekend, Google, Meta, and Salesforce have all recently walked back their remote work policies they originally set forth. And their reasoning is that the office is more efficient and cost effective. Where things are different than they were a year ago is that if they had pushed too hard for these mandates a year ago, their employees would have left and they would have gone to other companies that were a remote first model. Now, all you hear in the news is they're laying off 200,000. Tipping of the scale is really coming back to the employers. Last month, 600,000 US workers faced newly effective return to office mandates. The tech industry accounted for about a third, and 85,000 will join them back in the offices in September. As you can imagine, this reversal is creating tension for those who have adjusted to this flexibility they gained during the pandemic. The issue is that every single person has different preferences. Some people enjoy working amongst their colleagues and probably were going back to the office already before these mandates. And they like having that separation between work and home. Others prefer the working from home and being remote. It could be that they have long commutes. Think about all the people that moved away from city centers into further away suburbs, different things to have larger homes, larger yards during the pandemic. Now it might take them 2 hours to get into the city to be in the office. People are also concerned about childcare. A lot of people have gotten used to having that cost go down with being able to manage both, which I would suspect is incredibly hard. The other thing is that a lot of offices have open floor plans, and people are home and they're in their offices or they're in their segregated spots, that they are being able to be more productive than they were if they are in a office floor plan or an open floor plan where colleagues are coming up to you all the time and talking and they feel like they're getting nothing done. I think the debate is particularly acute in the tech sector because they were an early, supporter and a booster of the remote work trend. This is probably why they are having the greatest pressure to right-size their workforces. They were hiring everybody anywhere they were, and they got to a point where they realized they probably had gone overboard. The other problem with these announcements that are being made by these technology companies today is that they're starting to tell employees that if they don't return, it's going to affect their performance reviews. So, as one person said, that it was just quoted in the Wall Street Journal, Overnight, a worker's professionalism has been disregarded in favor of an ambiguous attendance tracking practice tied to our performance evaluations. The practical application of this new policy is a needless confusion amongst workers and a disregard for our various life circumstances. Google came out saying they thought this hybrid approach incorporates the best of in-person with the benefits of working from home part of the week. Another concern in a lot of what people are doing, and why Korn Ferry, from one, had said, listen, if there's not a majority of people in the offices, we need to get rid of these leases. US office occupancy, and you guys have probably seen this stat a million times, it's just at 50%. It is higher in Europe and Asia, but it's still, even abroad, nowhere near what it was in the 2019 levels. So one study that I read is said, ultimately, the question where people should work boils down to three major issues. What working at the office really costs employees and the company, and then how much productivity an office really generates, or how much flexibility remote work really creates. As you can imagine, the number for both will vary widely for every company, but they'll also vary widely within the company. So you need to take that into consideration. If a company saves money letting all their office-based workers go remote full-time, could the saving from that be swamped by lost revenues from future products and services that would have better been innovated through a team-based approach? So there is no right answer. One size fits all organizational wide policies are not going to satisfy anyone. So thinking about a solution, what could companies be doing? What could HR organizations be doing in supporting their leaders on how do we need to manage these different frustrations and issues that all of our employees are having over this topic? And it really comes down to individual company needs and individual employee needs. Roles and responsibility differentiations are going to have to be considered when letting people work remotely. For example, I was reading something that was saying a marketing organization, for example, they do really well when they're whiteboarding and they're ideating and they're coming up with a lot of different ideas. That kind of a functional organization may do incredibly well if they're in an office setting, and not as well if they're all working remote from their individual homes. However, a finance team, let's say an accounting team, you have a large staff accounting organization that they really don't interact with each other. They don't work with each other. Maybe that group you let stay home if that is what they want to do, because bringing them all together is not going to provide a whole lot of innovation or productivity that they're not getting from home. Another group is a product group. Have them in the office when they're coming up with new product development for 2 weeks, and then let them go back into their offices and back into their home offices and be able to work on their individual tasks or their part of whatever that new product development is. I was reading an article of a CHRO said recently where they had an office mandate that everyone is back in the office 3 days a week. And then instead of evaluating all the positions beforehand, they just made that blanket, everyone needs to come back 3 days a week. And he said, I should have evaluated each position beforehand. There was a group of leaders or a group of individuals within the organization that never interacted with anybody at the company, but they were forced to come back into the office 3 days a week. Well, now they're stepping back and making those decisions on a group by group or individual basis. That being said, you also, though, have to go back and think about that majority that still wants that office setting. Even if you say, okay, finance, you can work from home, you have to give still people an option, an office setting, whether it's a WeWork or some other kind of working arrangement that they are able to leave their home if need be. So one of the things that I dug into, because I was really interested in it, of whether it had an impact of how people viewed work from home or hybrid or working in an office full time, is I thought there's got to be a generational divide. People in different generations at these companies have to feel differently about it. If I, as a Gen X, am talking to people on the soccer field, and I'm talking to people that have teenagers or college kids, I can talk to them, and I'm hearing from them, oh, I need to be in an office. We're used to being in an office. Boomer generation, they're used to being in an office. They're fine going back into an office. They have no issue with it. But then when I actually started looking at the data, it was actually the opposite and a little bit more of what is actually needed. So millennials and Gen Zers are the ones that are really suffering the most working from home. They're not getting the development, the mentorship, or the career growth opportunities that they would have received if they were in an in-office setting with others. They have no face time with senior leadership, where the boomers and the Gen X generation they know how to be productive. They've been working for a long period of time and they're personally motivated. So it may be that what is actually needed may be different than what they want, but I think those are interesting elements. And again, it's something that leaders, HR leaders and senior leaders need to take into consideration, is different people's views because of how their career has spanned and the length of their careers. The one thing that I had mentioned about these Gen Zers and millennials that are missing out on that development is really probably something everybody is saying. And what I mentioned earlier of that personal, hyper-personal digital experience. Onboarding and training has suffered with people being remote and home. Mark Zuckerberg said in March that he was, kind of just studying his engineering organization. And he said, engineers who joined the company in person prior to the pandemic and then went remote during the pandemic, and they remained remote or they came back in person, performed better on average than those who joined the company during the pandemic remotely, because they never got the proper onboarding and training. Meta, as I said, is one of the companies that are requiring people to come back. He said they are continuously refining their model to foster that collaboration, relationships, and culture necessary for employees to do their best work. Salesforce had the same thing. They were asking their new sales leaders to come in because they need new sales leaders and their entire sales organizations, because he said they have to come together, learn together, and sell together. It is really hard for a salesperson to learn those skills remotely when they are not working with others. So in 2022, Korn Ferry took part in the world's most admired companies research. They surveyed more than 15,000 executives, And 2/3 said they felt culture accounted for more than 30% of the market value of their respective organizations. So everything that I have been sharing, what has probably suffered the most are the culture of these organizations. And this really needs to be the time where it has to be really well thought of, intentional leadership, because these are very delicate issues about how and where people are going to work moving forward. If people are not happy where they are working, this is going to have a significant effect on the culture. I've seen it different places. I've seen it with organizations I work with as a search partner. I've seen it in our own organization. It can cause toxicity, and nobody wants that for their culture. One of the things that people are doing more and more, and like the company I just shared about, starting to do surveys, trying to understand on an individual and a group basis what is best for those organizations. There needs to be surveys, find out what employees really value, why they like the flexibility. This should not be perceived as a war between leaders and their employees. I went going back to that KF Briefings magazine, and where it has 3 people just looking so upset and yelling. That's what is, for some reason, this whole thing is causing. There needs to be solid explanations on why some people are coming back, but others are not. So if you are going to do it on a group by group basis, there has to be reasons. Like, again, the sales, the marketing, the finance, the product. What are the reasonings behind why they are in office or why they are remote? It can't be based on proximity to an office. If somebody that never interacts with another individual in their work is told they have to come into the office because they're within 20 miles of one of the offices for their company, that is going to cause disgruntlement. There's going to be frustration around that. It also can't be that people perceive that they're all in the office, but the management is not in the office. It really has to start at the top. If a sales leader is requiring his sales team to be in the office, if they're not on calls, if they're not meeting with customers, then that sales manager needs to be in the office as well. Consulting directly with employees can help reduce the tensions. They can understand the decisions, make them feel a part of that decision making by just having a transparent process. One of the other things that I saw just recently is, and this came out of a Korn Ferry survey, is that companies are requiring people to come back to the office on Mondays. So before it was 3 days in the office. Well, as you could expect, people were coming in Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. And now they're saying 3 days in the office, but Monday has to be one of the days. Well, why is that? There has to be an explanation. There has to be a reason. It should be, we have our staff meetings on Monday, and we like to have everybody in person at those meetings. If you don't give a reason, and it's really because you think people are having 3-day weekends, that is just making employees feel like that they distrust their employees, and it's going to make everyone angry. The other thing that really needs to be developed more is better skills training for managers when they are managing a remote, dispersed workforce. So I'm sure you heard a lot during this entire 3 years about middle managers being affected the most. One of the reasons why they're having such burnout is they were not trained, or they don't have the skill set to manage and create a culture with a remote distributed team, especially with all the hiring that has taken place over the last 3 years. Most managers have not met anybody in person that's on their team before. takes a lot of time to build that trust over a Zoom or a Teams video. So giving them the skills, there needs to be fresh training focused on soft skills rather than hard skills. I know we're all performance driven and results driven, and we're looking at those numbers, but if no one is happy, the revenues are going to be affected. That profitability and productivity is going to be affected. So building those soft skills on how do they create those connections and culture with a remote distributed team. One of the things that we have done in our organization, because we are a complete remote distributed team, in fact, not a single person on our team of 15 live in the same state. We are all in separate states. So we started having bi-weekly water cooler Zoom meetings where we talk about our families. We talk about what are we doing this weekend. We talk about what shows we're streaming. If we do talk about work, we're laughing about something that happened with a client or a candidate in a humorous way. We need to have that ability and embrace the small talk, because if we don't, and all we are doing is working together and being driven and burning out, that's not going to create a great culture. Going into those Zoom meetings is, I'm sure you have found in the last 3 years that you have become very, very well versed in multitasking while you're on a Zoom meeting. I can't tell you how many times, and I've been guilty of it as well, that somebody has asked a question and I'm like, I'm sorry, what? Because all of a sudden an email came in and I'm working, I'm doing that as the same time as listening to whatever meeting I'm in. I think there's a lot of things that we can do around that, because these Zoom meetings and Teams meetings are not going to stop, because we're still going to have a remote and a hybrid structure. So some of the things that we've talked about as a group is devoting 5-10 minutes of that time, having that small talk, making sure that we're all embracing each other on a personal level. And then let's not have 20 things on our agenda. Let's have 1 or 2 things on our agenda that we have to accomplish during that hour. And the last, and it is hard to say, hey, everybody, put down your other screen. Do not check emails. This is incredibly important that we take care of this today. One of the final things that I would suggest, and it's something I'm advocating for at my own company, is if you do have a remote culture, a remote workforce or a hybrid workforce, you still have to provide those opportunities for those in-person meetings. Doesn't have to be monthly, doesn't even have to be quarterly. If somebody is having an annual meeting or an annual retreat for everybody to get together, it's amazing how energized people are walking away from that and feeling connected to the company. Even if we're all sitting here on Zoom and we're having our water cooler time and we're enjoying each other, we may not feel connected to our company. But if our company is providing these retreats or being like, hey, we're really excited about the future of this company and we're going to do everything to support it, that's getting that connection to the company. So in conclusion, I would say, there's not an arrangement that every company and every single person will be happy with, but I think we can agree that if we're letting people be heard and taking individual groups and individuals into consideration and making them feel part of the process and being transparent about the process, that people are going to have to become a lot more comfortable and feel very good about their company going forward. So I'm happy to answer any questions that the group has.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle, today for all your insight and all the different examples. And like you said, it's going to be a work in progress because there's no one one solution for any one organization. So we do have one question from Cecilia. Are there any statistics of demographics for the 11% that wants to come back and the 62% that wants some sort of time in the office? For other industries such as manufacturing and retail, is being also a balancing act to provide flexibility to corporate functions while having essential workers fully on site. Any data, recommendations on how to manage both expectations on a fairly received way?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's so interesting. I will say I do not have the statistics of the 11% and then the 60 some percent underneath that, but I am sure there is some data backing that I would be able to find, and I'd be happy to share with you after this. But I agree with you. The situation where you have, and by the way, this happened at the beginning of the pandemic when there were employees in manufacturing, logistics, technicians that still were working. I mean, they were on, having to do everything that was required of them prior to the pandemic. And I think that is where, when we say these decisions need to be implemented and followed by the top, meaning if your team of in manufacturing plants and logistic warehouses are there, you need to be there as well as the manager or the supervisor, because that is going to be a requirement. Now there's a lot of technology innovation that's taking place that is going to be interesting, that is going to impact those workforces, and how potentially there could be areas where they're doing remote diagnostics and being able to do things that are very, unique, where those types of workers may not have to be on the job or in an office or warehouse. So I think that evolution, again, a completely different topic, will be interesting as well.
Thank you. Well, please continue to post your questions in the chat box. We have a few more minutes. I was going to ask you, Michelle, I know you said your background, what you do is search. How have you seen search change, through the pandemic and now for the technology industry?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it has definitely changed. I think everybody knows kind of what the roller coaster has been, in the sense, the beginning of the pandemic, it was a complete shutdown. It wasn't a slowdown, it was a shutdown. Any searches that we were working on were stopped. We were all just waiting and seeing. But as quickly as it fell was how quickly it rose, because of all of a sudden the demand. As somebody that specialized in telecom, and I also work a lot in the semiconductor industry, the demand was unheard of. And all of a sudden, when we were working on 0 searches, we were each executive was working on 20 searches at a time, and it became really intense, and everything was remote. So everybody we were hiring was a remote hire, and it was easier to find candidates that way. Well, then you had the Great Resignation. That also caused a lot of work. And that was, the Great Resignation was still in the time where there was such high demand. So think about the Great Resignation is everybody is working remote. They want to work remote. They're not going to go to a company that is not remote. I think I mentioned earlier on, if people were required to be in office, it was less so in 2022. It was less requirement than it is now. But if there was that obligation, people were leaving. They had no issues with leaving. People became much pickier in terms of the jobs that they would accept. We used to tell our clients, Every single candidate we are talking to has 2 or 3 offers in their hand. So if you are excited about this candidate, you need to move quickly. So it ended up, it was a war on talent. Everybody was going after everybody, and it was an employees market. They called the shots. They were getting these high compensation packages, and our job was incredibly hard. Well, then, as everybody knows, at the end of 2022, early 2023, the pendulum has swung a bit. We're now in a place where a lot of companies, again, both in the telecom and the semiconductor and other technology companies, like you saw with Google and Meta, they started right-sizing their companies. They hired too many. They are having layoffs, and all of a sudden they feel like they can call the shots. That being said, no matter what company it is that we are working with right now, if they say you are in the office 5 days a week, we have a very hard time filling those roles. And we're very upfront with our clients. We'll say, listen, we appreciate it. We will work until we find the best candidate that's going to be in the office 5 days a week. But just so you know, the search will take longer than what we usually would expect it to take. If they're looking for a relocation, that's almost a non-starter with executives these days. Most candidates, and I'm talking at the director level all the way up, feel like they do not have to relocate for a role. Because of this flexibility in work schedule, they will absolutely, we always tell them, if a job is in and headquarters are in Boston, we are going to spend almost 90% of our time finding candidates in Boston for you. We could call, let's say, out of 20. If we call 20 people to see if they would relocate from another city to Boston, we might get one at the most that would be willing to relocate. I was giving an example before about an opportunity I'm working on in Sacramento, and they want somebody in the office at least 3 days a week, every other week. Most of the candidates are coming from the Bay Area. They will not commute to be in the office in Sacramento. And it's a 1.5, 2 hour commute. So it has been, it has been very challenging. And I don't know how it's going to end up. I will be perfectly honest. I do think it'll be more in office than not, definitely more than fully remote. But I think the key is going to be perfecting this hybrid structure going into the future and providing some kind of flexibility to their employees. And those will be the most attractive opportunities for candidates.
So it sounds like what you said earlier about surveying to understand what a person's concept is for flexibility. And that's the key factor for it is going to be that moving forward.
Absolutely.
Just checking to see if there are any more questions. I don't think we have any more, and we're close to finishing time and almost 2 o'clock. So I wanted to make sure that everyone knows. Well, first of all, Michelle, thank you so much for your time today, sharing your insight. We will be sending an email to everyone who's attending, so you have a copy of the recording. And then also, SHRM, there is continuing education credits. It'll be included in an email that will go to, but this is the code for today's HR Learning Series. And Michelle, I just thank you and Korn Ferry so much for sharing this. Like you said, it's a topic that causes lots of discussion. There's a lot of conflict around it because everyone has a different opinion on how to move forward. But like you said, it's going to be a process of perfecting the new way that people are seeing their work. And so I want to thank everyone in the community today for joining us, and hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.